Now, there have been some questions about Europa Universalis 3, including how the hell do you play it, which is a pretty valid question because it is a learning curve that I would probably describe as a wall. This is Heir to the Throne, the latest expansion of 3. You need all 3 to play, so if there's a feature that is not in a previous version of the game, that's probably why. The main options menu is just for basically game stuff. I'll go over this in a bit more detail later. But the main essence of the game is, of course, the single-player campaign, where you take a country through medieval history into the Enlightenment and so on. So let's see what we have here. Starting the game gives us a map of the world in 1399 AD, which is the earliest possible starting date. As you can see, we're sort of able to choose any country that existed during the time period. So we can pick Ethiopia here, Ming China, but the focus of the game is pretty much on Europe, and that's pretty much where most events happen in this large mess of what will eventually become recognizable European states. Now, most people play starting from this earliest start date in 1399, and they often complain that the resulting picture of Europe is grossly ahistorical. Well, it's kind of obvious to see why. There's so many little states, so many of these supposedly large states like Spain, France, Germany, Austria are very small, and so it's not always a guarantee that they're going to survive. This is also the low point in the history of the Ottoman Empire here. They were getting their asses kicked. So it's not necessarily the best point if you're looking for a historical game. The older expansion started in 1453, this scenario, which is the capture of Constantinople by the Ottomans. It's a little bit more stable. You have more powerful countries. France hasn't fully formed yet, but it's very close. And otherwise, it's very similar to 1399. Now, if you wanted, you could jump on down to first day of January 1520. Now, one reason I kind of like this is it's a little bit more predictable. You have Spain already formed, France is mostly done. The Ottoman Empire is large, controls Egypt, which it almost never manages to do in the actual game. Russia exists. Persia exists. A lot of large historical countries that otherwise generally wouldn't quite form properly. The Netherlands are still controlled by Spain, but that can be quickly resolved. So in terms of country choices, usually if you're starting out, good choices would be Castile, which becomes Spain if you're remotely competent, Portugal, which is a very simple kind of isolationist colonizing country, France, of course, which is pretty much the most powerful nation in the world for the entire time frame of the game, except maybe China. And another popular choice is England, which I will probably be going with. Before you start a game, there are a bunch of options. These options are actually game options, so they're a little different. You have things like advisors and leaders. These have a historical option, but I don't recommend you do that because it's broken. It's supposed to take leaders and advisors from a pool of historically accurate ones, but it doesn't seem to do it properly. You have colonists, merchants, missionaries. These can all be made free, which means they don't cost money to send. That's usually kind of bad. Inflation, which I'll talk about, you can turn it off or just have it come from gold, none of which are necessarily a good idea. You can also change the size of colonists if you want to colonize more quickly. Their default is 100. You can go anywhere up to 400. It only takes 1,000 people in a colony to turn into a main city, so setting it up to 400 means you only have to take 3 colonists instead of 10. The main settings here are difficulty and AI aggressiveness. Generally speaking, the higher the difficulty is, the more bonuses the AI gets, a little harder on you in terms of modifiers that are negative. I usually leave it on normal. Some people put it up to very hard. The other factor is AI aggressiveness. Now, what you might figure is, oh, well, if I want the game to be harder, I'll set the AI aggressiveness up to high. Unfortunately, the problem is that historically the countries of the world were not starting wars that constantly. They did start a lot of them, but not quite so many that they were rapidly expanding and murdering each other at an insane rate. So some people actually set this to low, because it means that the AI doesn't go to war quite as often, unless it absolutely has to. I kind of like having it on normal just to spice it up. You then have the spread of land and sea provinces. I'll talk about that. Basically, things that you can't know about yet. It takes a certain amount of time before someone in your technology group has discovered them before you can find them too. So, for instance, this represents like Spain discovering Mexico, and eventually people know where Mexico is, and if they were going to send colonists and ships out that way, they could do it too. But Spain found it first, and they're the ones who are going to hoard all the knowledge about it as long as they can. Spies, same thing as the colonists above. You can make them free. I don't recommend that. Lucky nations, I recommend turning off. It's a function that makes certain historically powerful nations really strong, but unfortunately if you do that, then basically you're going to make France invincible, which isn't a whole lot of fun if you're playing a small country, and it doesn't apply to the player anyway, so if you were France, you wouldn't get the bonus. So we're going to start with England. King Henry VIII is king at this point. He has no legal heir, so we probably will not see Elizabeth because that gets randomized once the game starts. Henry VIII is a fun guy, though, so that's not too bad. Allied with Portugal, a Catholic nation. The game estimates the difficulty about midway. More or less, the pacifier means that it's too easy. The skull and crossbones means it's too hard. This is just the game's estimation. You can take a nation that's fully over here into the skull and crossbones at the start and make them world power, so it's really not that hard. But if you pick France, for instance, or Spain, you're pretty much always going to be on this far side because it's so incredibly easy to play as them and so incredibly hard to lose, as you might expect. So it's 1520, and we'll start playing with England.